We just built our house, Will and I. Last month we were able to move in. It's small, not even 1,000 square feet. His parents call it a micro home. I call it perfect. It's just us and our 2 dogs. Well, 3 now, but I'll talk about that in a minute. First, I should explain a few things so this story makes more sense. I've lived most of my life here in Colorado. I was born and raised in Denver. I took a hiatus when I went to college out of state, but I came back. It's home. Our new house is just east of the Front Range and south of Denver. We're pretty far out of the city. It takes 30 minutes or so to reach the city limits of Denver. Our nearest and pretty much only neighbor, Steve, is just over half a mile away, which isn't really all that far. I can see his house from here as I type this. He's also my best friend and has been since high school. It's really an awesome setup for Will and I, and we love it. But last night didn't go so well. Will is out of town for work for 4 days, leaving me and the dogs alone in the new place for the first time. It didn't occur to me to be bothered by this since I've spent plenty of nights alone before. The day was as normal as could be. I drove Will to the airport without any trouble, came home, took the dogs for a stroll around the property, got some work done. I talked to Will on Skype for a while, made dinner and retired to the deck out back afterwards. I was sitting in a chair, enjoying the cool air, minding my own business. Down the road a bit I could see the lights on in Steve's house. Not a thing seemed to be out of the ordinary. I was so enjoying the night air that I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, took in the smells and sounds of nature around me, and that's when one of the dogs growled. The sound made me sit up so fast I almost fell out of my chair. I studied the 3 dogs and figured out pretty quickly that it was Big Ben who had made the noise. Ears alert, he was staring off into the night with keen eyes. The 2 girls were equally alert, although they didn't seem to have heard or seen what he had. The look to him while he continued to gaze toward the dark yard. He gave another low, almost inaudible growl. Now there's certain sounds that dogs make that really put you on alert. This was one of them. It was an unsure, almost hesitant growl, like something was spooking him, but he didn't know exactly what. I followed his gaze, but nothing within the confines of the fenced and backyard seemed to miss. Unless there was an animal just beyond the wooden fence, as far as I could tell, there was nothing at all for him to be growling about. I watched him for a minute, and he kept looking in the same place. He'd sniff the air, and his ears would swivel as though something just beyond his ability to sense was out there. I started to feel a little creeped out, but the other 2 dogs, Danny and Nina, didn't seem to be picking up on anything. I studied him for a few more minutes and finally convinced myself he was either overreacting about something or imagining things. So Big Ben is our newest addition. He showed up a few weeks before the house was finished, just out of the blue one day while I was checking on the progress of things. He's a massive, shaggy black bear of a dog. Although he appeared to be a stray, he'd come right up to me, tail wagging, and greeted me as though he'd been my dog all his life. Who could turn him away? We took him in immediately. The vet we took him to found no microchip, and no one around had heard of a missing dog, so we kept him. Will was the one who named him, and a fitting name it is. He's 100 pounds, and his shoulder almost comes up to my hip. I'm convinced he's got wolf in him. He's been like an oversized puppy from day one, never aggressive and as obedient and loyal as our girls. But at times I have some trouble figuring him out. Sometimes he does weird things. Growls at nothing, stops dead in his tracks like he hears something, or stares into the distance like he thinks he sees something. At the end of the day, we have no idea what his life was like before us. It was possible he was on his own for months. The vet thinks he's about 3. His heightened sense of awareness could just be from being on his own for so long, having to look out for himself. Nonetheless, I felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere as a result of him growling into the darkness. I was genuinely uneasy, and for the first time since Will had left, was fully appreciating the fact that aside from my trio of dogs, I was alone. My eyes involuntarily drifted towards Steve's house. The light from within gave me a sense of comfort, knowing I could pick up the phone and have him at the door in minutes calm me down some. But I wasn't about to bother him over this. I was going to head back in for the night when I looked towards the black shadow of the mountains, and then I heard it. It was a very faint, almost indiscernible sound coming from the woods, a pattering sound like something walking on the forest floor. It was so faint that I wasn't even sure if I was hearing it or my ears were playing tricks on me. It could have been the light breeze rustling the leaves. And then a light wind came up, and I swear the moment it did, I heard what sounded like someone saying, "Shh." That freaked me out, but when I strained to listen, it was hard to distinguish the sounds of the wind and the leaves from anything else. I thought I imagined it. The dark was making me freak myself out. The sound of faint footfalls continued. It went on for a few minutes before it was so faint I couldn't tell if it was wind or not. I shrugged it off. There's deer back there and stray cats and probably other animals I never even see. There was no reason to worry about it, but it still sufficiently creeped me out. So I went back inside. I watched Netflix, yay Peaky Blinders, for a bit but got sleepy. By 11 I was in bed, and it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. But I didn't stay asleep. A sharp, urgent growl woke me up with a start. When your dogs alert you like that when you're awake, it's unnerving enough. Waking up to it is worse. My immediate thought was, there's something going on that I've missed. My heart was racing as I strained to see in the dark. Big Ben was sitting at the foot of the bed, looking towards the window. The curtains were drawn, so there was no way he could possibly see anything there. Then Danny gave a growl and Nina chimed in. I'm not gonna lie, I was already scared. It's hard to not let your imagination run away with you in that situation. There was a light breeze, and to my horror, I realized I'd left the window open. I never leave windows open at night, not even when Will's home. Our bedroom is on the ground floor, and I don't feel safe doing it. I felt even more vulnerable knowing I had stupidly left the damn window open. Big Ben growled again. This was different from the unsure growling he had done on the deck. This was louder, more urgent, more like he knew what he was hearing or smelling, and it was something that absolutely warranted being growled at. Another breeze rustled the curtains, and there was an unnatural shift in the shadows outside. Something was moving out there on my deck. I sat bolt upright, causing the dogs to go into full-on protection mode. Big Ben was barking his warning bark, and the girls joined. At the sound, whatever was outside ran for it. Heavy, loud footfalls could be heard above the chaotic barking as it bolted along the deck. With my dogs flanking me, I reached through the slit in the curtains, slammed the window shut, and locked it. I yanked the curtains fully closed, rolled back across the bed, and pulled out the revolver I keep in my nightstand. The dogs were going berserk, and I had to almost yell to get them to stop barking. I got my phone and called Steve. Still growling, Big Ben poked his head behind the curtain to look outside. I was shaking all over, sweating bullets as the phone rang. Nina stood at the closed bedroom door like a sentry, ears erect, listening for further threats. Danny was standing upright but still on the bed. I had never been so glad to have them. Steve picked up, sounding sleepy, and I told him what happened. I was almost crying as I did, and he told me not to move because he was coming over. I couldn't have moved if I tried. I was too terrified. I just sat in bed with the gun in hand and dogs surrounding me. I finally noticed the time, 2:15 in the morning. I heard Steve let himself in not 5 minutes later. We keep keys to each other's houses, and he knocked on the bedroom door. Leah? Are you all right? Yeah, it's open, I told him. He came in and was wide-eyed and looked about as scared as I was. He was carrying his shotgun with him. The dogs were usually all over him when he visited, but they pushed past him to go investigate the house. Which way do you think it ran? Steve asked me immediately, peering out the bedroom window. It took off towards the trees, I said, still in disbelief. He looked in the direction of the woods that bordered the property. Could it have been a deer? He asked. I strained to remember the sound of whatever it was thundering across the deck. I felt sick in my stomach. I wanted it to be a deer. I so wanted it to have been a wild animal that had simply wandered too close. It could have been replied. Truth was, deep down, I knew whatever had springed across my deck hadn't done so on 4 legs. Steve looked concerned, like he knew I didn't really believe that theory, but didn't say anything. It could have just been kids? Playing a prank or something? I asked, hoping it could be as simple as that. He glanced uneasily out the window again. I could tell he was trying hard not to scare me. I know my best friend. He thought it was something more malignant than kids being jerks. Big Ben came back into the bedroom. He licked Steve's hand and jumped on the bed, curling up so he was practically on my lap. Steve, against my wishes, went to investigate the deck. I watched him the whole time from the window, still reeling, and from the whole ordeal. If it had indeed been a human out there, my paranoid mind was convinced they were just beyond the trees, still watching the house. I was on edge until he came back inside. He had walked around the perimeter of the entire house with his shotgun and found no trace of anything. Nonetheless, I was still shaken up, and he agreed to stay the rest of the night. I made up the couch for him, and we sat up and talked about the strange event for a while, exchanging various theories until both of us felt safe enough to sleep. Whatever had been outside my window was probably long gone, and I was even beginning to believe it could have been an animal of some sort. I had been half asleep when it all happened. It could easily have been a deer or even a coyote or something, and I had let my imagination get the better of me. I slept until almost noon, and when I woke up, Steve was still asleep on the couch. So I sat down to write this out. It's what I do. I'm a freelance writer, and typing this out just feels right, cathartic even. I've already decided not to tell Will what happened, at least not while he's away. He's a worrywart, and it would only upset him. He'll be home in 3 days, and I'll tell him then. I'm looking out the window towards a tree line now and feeling unsettled all over again. My dogs are curled up nearby, and Steve, along with his shotgun, are one room over. I'm perfectly safe. But something just feels off today. Something's not right, but I can't quite put my finger on what it is. It's making it difficult to sit still for long. I keep finding myself looking out the window. For the first time, I feel intimidated by my new house, the isolation and remoteness of it. The forested area at the edge of the property was a big deciding factor when we bought this land. There's good hiking back in there, and the trees are beautiful in the winter. But now, it's a foreboding place to me. A place where bad things can hide. The worst part of it is not knowing what or who had been practically pressed against my open bedroom window. Maybe it had been a deer and I was overreacting. But if it had been a human, why my window? Why my house? And why in the first night I was there alone? Could they have been watching and waiting for this particular night? I know your mind can go to some pretty dark places when it's the middle of the night. Things always seem scarier then. But after what happened, can you blame me? Big Ben hasn't let me get much more than 3 feet from him since last night. Nina and Danny are a little restless too. I let them outside in the fenced yard for a bit. Running around and playing seemed to help their moods. But Ben didn't go out and play. He went to the edge of the yard, did his business, and came right back to be glued at my side. I don't think I've seen his ears relax since Will left. I took a walk around the deck just now. It wraps around the whole house with a gate you have to go through to get to the part that overlooks the fenced yard. When I opened it, I noticed it wasn't latched all the way. I figured Steve had neglected to pull it shut the whole way when he was checking things out last night. Along the side of the deck where the animal or person had been, I have large planters with white hydrangeas growing. It didn't take long to notice that my hydrangea blooms are wilted and brown, like they've been nipped by frost. I know it wasn't that cold last night, and this discovery has weirded me out all over again. I'm going to show Steve when he gets up, and maybe we can figure out who or what was skulking around my house in the dead of the night. I lived at my parents' house because the cost of living was so expensive. I was a university student working casual jobs and couldn't afford to move out. One day, my parents left to go on a business trip in France and decided to make a family vacation out of it. It was in the middle of exam period, so I couldn't go, but they took my 4 siblings. I was ecstatic since I could have the whole house to myself. They left early Monday morning. I looked forward to being the man of the house for the upcoming week. Everything was great until around 7 p.m. the next night. I was driving back home on a long, dimly lit road leading towards my street. Suddenly, I spotted a bald, shirtless man walking alongside the street carrying a shovel. Even though I saw him momentarily, his figure is etched in my brain. He was as pale as the moon and his eyes were lifeless and empty. We live in a suburban area far from any farmland. I couldn't imagine what someone would need a shovel for at this time of night. I kept driving. Checking no one had followed me, I drove into the garage and closed the door. Of course no one followed me. I chuckled to myself as I went about making dinner. By the next day, I had convinced myself that he might have just been lost or had dementia or something. Having 3 lumen exams around the corner helped me forget about the man. I studied at home that day, which meant I got to practice a new prelude for piano as I studied music theory. I studied hard, only to stop for food and the occasional YouTube video until I noticed the time, 7:34 p.m. Damn it, I muttered as I realized that I had forgot to bring my washing in. It would have to go in the dryer now. I grabbed a basket and went outside, soaking in the soft night sounds of crickets and rustles in the leaves. Suddenly, I heard movement down my driveway. Moving quietly, I tentatively approached the end of the driveway, outlined by a perimeter of bushes. "Hey, who's there?" I asked nervously. No answer. As I waited near the bushes, I braced myself for a shovel to come towards my face. There was only more rustle of leaves, then silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for someone to appear. But no one did. Returning to the clotheslines, I grabbed the basket and went back inside, ensuring the door was locked behind me. It was now Wednesday, and I was more than just a bit nervous. I checked that every window and door were locked several times before leaving for university. I couldn't focus in class. I was still thinking about the man I saw on Monday night. When I arrived home, I took out a packet of 2-minute noodles and watched Breaking Bad. We live in a bigger house, which unfortunately means it creaks a lot more on its own when no one is making any noise. The house is equipped with a motion detecting system, but I don't trust its accuracy, so I did laps throughout the house whenever I heard a creak that was a bit too loud. Every time I walked past the windows outlooking our backyard, I expected to see that pale face pushed up against the window looking inside. I wanted to call the police to just ask them to drive around my street and see if anyone was lurking, but I felt embarrassed for getting so worked up over no physical evidence. I decided against calling the police and shortly went to bed, accompanied by nothing but the howling wind outside. It was now Thursday, which meant another day of practicing at home. Having finished my practice at around 8 p.m., I got up to make myself a sandwich. As I gathered the cheese, ham, and lettuce for my sandwich, I paused to remember what I needed for school tomorrow. That's when I heard it. A singular high-pitched piano note echoed throughout the house. The blood drained from my face as I looked down the stairs of our home. I froze in fear, unable to move a muscle. Slowly, I turned and saw the motion detector panel. It consisted of 6 lights, 1 for each room a sensor was in. I saw the lights for room 2, which was where I was, and room 6, which was where the piano was. They were flashing. All I could do was watch as the light for room 6 turned off, and subsequently the light for room 5 began flashing. It was then when I could hear running down the hallway. Grabbing the knife on the bench, I ran for one of the bedrooms and lay underneath the bed. I could hear someone running up the stairs as I lay there. Walking around the kitchen table, they tapped their fingers on the bench. Holding my breath, I waited as he approached the bedroom I was hiding in. He entered the room, but all I could see were his legs. He stood there silently, peered into the closet, then turned and left. Now was my chance. I left the bedroom quietly, clutching at the knife. I crept down the stairs slowly. However, as I reached the bottom stair, a soft creak left the floorboards. I ran towards the front door, reaching for the keys that hung next to it. I could hear him coming as I tried to unlock the door. Once I flung the door open, I ran towards the end of the driveway, screaming for help. The police were shortly called, but couldn't find anyone in the house or in the nearby area. After giving the neighbors the description of the man I saw on Monday, I was told that the description sounded like someone who used to live a couple of streets away. However, he had gone missing 6 months ago. For the rest of the week, police patrolled my street for the next few days, but didn't find anything. But to this day, the image of the man walking down my street is permanently stuck in my head. I've since moved out into my own place, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't check the house carefully every time I come home late at night. I guess it's fair to say that a majority of people don't like sleeping when they're home alone. I mean, if you live alone, you're probably already adjusted, but if you live with people, sleeping when you're home by yourself is a strange and slightly sinister thought. Yet the concept is completely innocent. Who can't close their eyes and sleep just because there's nobody around? It's a trait we perhaps acquired when we were babies. We'd cry if someone left the room. Well, I did anyway. I think about this all the time. When I shower, in class, when I'm out with friends, I've considered maybe it's just me. Perhaps it's my strong bond with my mother. When she isn't in the house, I don't panic. But when it's nearing time for bed and she isn't home, I get nervous. Sweat gathers in my palm and my heart beats faster. The sickening butterflies transform into furious wasps, stinging my stomach and remind me that yes, I am scared. Getting ready for bed is slow. I deliberately drag it out. I turn my bedclothes inside out before writing them and putting them on. A sleeve at a time, a trouser leg at a time, then I turn my whole bed around. I'll take all the sheets off and put them back on. I'll pat them free from stray hairs and dust before writing it once more. I always go downstairs and drink water while simultaneously checking the dark corners of the house. I lock, unlock, and lock the back and front door before tightly pulling on the windows to ensure they're locked to dot. It's not paranoia. I don't have any kind of overly compulsive disorder. It's just something I do to avoid the journey back upstairs a little longer. I'll check on the cats. They're always sleeping. Not a single sound will stir them when they sleep. And then I'll make that begrudged walk upstairs, past the closed bedroom doors, and I'll get into bed. I'll check texts and emails on my mobile before double-checking the alarm. The thought of closing my eyes and having to surround myself with darkness and silence lingers in the back of my mind, taunting me, and the wasps in my stomach dissolve into acid until I feel it's almost painful to endure. And the peculiar thing is, once I cut myself off from the hissing wind outside my window, the little drip of the tap in the bathroom next door, I sleep so soundly and so peacefully that I always wake up feeling refreshed and happy. It's always the best night's sleep I ever have, until July 30th, 2012. It was a Tuesday night. My mom and sister were sleeping soundly in their rooms whilst I get ready for bed. My slightly odd system is obsolete when there are people in the house. I don't dread the thought of sleeping, so my routine is pretty normal. It was around 11 p.m. when I drifted off to sleep, and then something woke me. At 3:21 a.m., I was wide awake and alert. My brain was active and ready to respond to something. As my wide eyes scanned the darkness of my room, I knew something was wrong. The nervous butterflies were fluttering their wings in the pits of my belly, and I got out of bed. Padding barefoot across the cold laminate flooring of my room, the handle was lit up by the light outside. It was the only thing I could see in the dark. It reminded me of one of those horror games, the close-up of the door handle as it turns and the door opens. The light from the hall outside my room was flickering, on and off. Was that what woke me? It wasn't unusual for it to flicker. We haven't replaced the bulb since we moved in years ago, but there was something about the way the light was blinking on and off that made this whole thing more scary. The bathroom to my room was dark. The door slightly ajar, but nothing could be seen inside. To my left was a hall that led to my mom and sister's room. In front of me were the stairs. Everything seemed normal. I could hear soft breathing coming from the rooms beside me and the unmistakable sound of my sisters snoring further away. I smiled to myself and felt the butterflies disappear. I still wasn't sure what awoke me at this hour, but everything was fine and I was safe. Just to be extra safe, I lightly pushed the bathroom door open further and let the flickering hall light wrap itself around the darkness there. Yep, everything in the bathroom was normal. My breathing went back to normal and I wanted to kick myself at my stupidity. I blamed it on the coffee I'd had before bed and decided a glass of water would cure my dry mouth. The house was silent. The only sound was the buzzing of lights as I flicked them on when I reached downstairs. The cats were where I left them the previous evening, sleeping on the kitchen floor. They didn't even stir when I turned the tap on a little too harshly and the water poured out too fast. Turning the lights off behind me, I glanced at the back door to see it hadn't been locked before. Mom must have forgotten. I inwardly rolled my eyes and turned the key once. The familiar locking of gears in the door made the cat's ears flick, but their eyes didn't open. As I made my way back to the stairs, I saw the hall light had turned completely off, shrouding the staircase in darkness. Taking a tighter grip of the wooden banister, I felt myself up to halfway. Who's that awake? A soft voice called from the top of the stairs, and I looked up to see stood at the top, hands on hips and hair in a mess. Even though the features weren't visible, the stance and voice was familiar, and I could have laughed at my previous horrible feeling. "Abby, Mum," I whispered as not to wake the sleeping teenager in the other room, "wanted a drink." Nothing was said for a moment until I took a step forward and Mum laughed under her breath before taking a step backwards towards her room. Back to sleep you go. She was back in her room by the time I reached the top of the stairs and bit my lip at the lecture I'll probably receive tomorrow for waking her. Just before I closed my bedroom door behind me, the creaking of a door startled me. I saw my sister's bedroom door ajar, but the darkness inside was hiding her face. You woke me up. This was great. A trip to get a glass of water and I'm waking my entire family up. Sorry, Luce. Go back to sleep. I can't see you. Yeah, I leaned over and felt for the hallway light. The light is broken, but I dash. I was cut off by the hall light flickering on when I pressed the switch. How strange. The light was obviously a nuisance to Lucy, who groaned and shut her door with a quiet thud. Shrugging, I got back into bed. It was around 3:59 a.m. when I finally got back to sleep, cursing my overreactive brain. It was a slam of a door that jolted me awake this time. It was nearing 7 a.m. and the light from the window was bright. I heard voices downstairs and cursed Dot. If this was payback from last night, it wasn't fair or funny. Padding across the room, I opened my door to see the hall light was still on. Not flickering at all, turning it off, I made my way downstairs. Sat on the sofa was my mum, dressed with her black gym trainers on and a coffee in her hand. She looked exhausted. Had I really been such an annoyance last night? Before she could berate me, my sister hobbled into the room from the kitchen. She was also dressed and I was shocked to see a cast on her foot. She smiled cheesily at me and plopped herself down on the armchair opposite my mum. Did you go somewhere? I asked, leaning against the door. Mum scoffed and pointed her finger at my sister, who was rolling her eyes. Somebody decided to fall out of bed last night. She fractured her ankle. With raised brows, I looked at my sister, who was nodding miserably, surprised you didn't wake up. I did around 3. Was it after then? Mum narrowed her eyes. It was around 12, Abby. We've been at the hospital since then. Only just got back. No, I was choking on oxygen, now struggling to breathe and taking this information. I hadn't been fooled last night. I woke you up, both of you last night around 3 a.m. when I went to get a glass of water. You were dreaming, my sister muttered. We were up that hospital for 6 hours straight. Haven't come home. Besides, if you'd woke me up last night, you would have a bruise on your body. Mum tutted and sipped her coffee. The butterflies were back, quickly changing into wasps before they melted into that familiar acid that makes me almost double over in agony. But this isn't making any sense. I took off up the stairs. I slammed myself into the light switch for the hall light and watched it come on, switch off and come on every time I switched it. I then peered into my room and felt my heart pound in my chest when I saw the glass of water sitting on my bedside table. Backtracking, I put a hand on my chest as if forcing my heart to slow down. Had I dreamt it? Did I make false conversations in my head? Slowly, hesitantly, I leaned out of my door to see my sister's and Mum's bedroom doors shut. I could hear no sleepy snores or soft breathing anymore, and the possibility of me dreaming it all became a well-known story in our house. It was told at Christmas and New Year's, family dinners, and to friends. The night Abby lost her mind, it was nicknamed. And even though the thought of me dreaming was perfectly logical and a rational explanation for what happened that night, I never go to sleep without locking all the doors and checking the windows, even when there are people in the house. And that's why I hate sleeping.